Probiotics is one of the newest trends to invade our grocery stores, but clinicians have understood their therapeutic value for decades. Well, today we're updating you on probiotics, the microbiome, and how there might be new ways to put them to work to get the best results for your patients. I'm joined here today with two experts in this matter, our special correspondent, Dr. Yasmin Tassalati, as well as Dr. David Lischeid, to do a deep dive into probiotics and their potential clinical uses.
So, Dr. David, do you believe that all individuals should be given probiotics, regardless of whether they have a diagnosed health condition or not? Because I know we always want to individualize programs for patients, but what is your take on that? Do you think everyone across the board should be taking one?
Well, that's a good question. I think the safest way to answer that scientifically is it depends. Current evidence suggests that really probiotics will have their most effectiveness in certain situations in our lives, certain, they call them development sensitive situations. People are pregnant when you're born until you're 2.5 to 3 years old is when your microbiome is really developing. During adolescence, when you're aging. So those times really seem appropriate for a probiotic. Another thing to think about, though, is that they also tend to make a lot of sense anytime there's kind of a disturbance to the microbiome, decrease the numbers and types, and that's called dysbiosis. And when you start to list of all the things that affect the microbiome, you know, it's things like many different drugs, environmental pollutants, food additives, even psychological stress affects the microbiome. So once you start to list all these things, then I think it'd be pretty hard to find somebody that wouldn't benefit from a probiotic. However, from at least what the science says, more likely you're going to get a beneficial effect if you can determine whether a person actually needs it or not. And how do you determine whether somebody needs it or not? Ask some questions. How's their GI tract doing? How's their stool frequency, the bloating, the gas? It's kind of a low-tech way. Or you can do testing. And there is actually some really valuable testing to be able to determine whether a person has different species that are associated with health or species that are associated with not being healthy. And so you can, if you really want to know that a person is going to have the most benefit from a probiotic, I think it's important to try to get at least a general idea whether they have dysbiosis or actually more in a more sophisticated way to do some of the specific testing. Short answer is, I don't think it's not going to do them any harm because they're very safe. But you're going to get the most benefit if you can determine that that person actually needs one, actually has some dysbiosis and actually needs one.
So what would you say are some of the common pathophysiological threads that the conditions that you listed, and how would probiotics be able to treat them?
Yeah.
So, like, is there a common thread between all of those conditions?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And yeah, the common thread, what's been seen is it's chronic low-grade inflammation. And so we've known that actually for many, many years that many of these chronic conditions, they're called non-communicable diseases, have some kind of chronic inflammation as part of their pathophysiology. And so somehow the inflammation just keeps going. It isn't turned off. And that causes changes to the tissue structure and functional changes. A really interesting part of this story, what's been discovered just in the last few years, that a big source of this chronic inflammation comes from the gut, comes from what's called, we've known this for years as integrated practitioners, they call it a leaky gut. In the literature, it's called a hyperpermeable epithelial barrier, or it's called endotoxemia. And those are the same things as a leaky gut. Sometimes in the literature, you'll see leaky gut is connected to things. Other times you'll see toxemia. It's all the same thing. So basically, if you get permeability in the gut, then there is, it's called lipopolysaccharide from the gram-negative bacteria that are there. It's also called endotoxin. Gets into the blood, gets carried to the rest of the body, many different organs, And that triggers inflammation. That triggers low-grade inflammation. So if you have this continuously leaky gut, you're going to continue to foster, continue to support this inflammation that will cause all this pathology. Now, one of the most beneficial ways to heal a leaky gut is through probiotics. That's where the research, I think, is really strong. Probiotics, through a number of different mechanisms, can help heal this epithelial barrier, can make sure that these molecules don't cross and become signals for chronic inflammation. In fact, the research is so strong now, there's actually papers that are suggesting a causal effect, which is actually a really quite a strong thing to say in science. Usually they say association or something like this, but they're actually saying a causal effect is hyperpermeability in the epithelial barrier, and this can be very effectively treated with probiotics.
I hope you enjoyed that highlight from a recent program on Nutramedica. If you want to get access to our full-length shows and live interactive events, you'll need to register as a healthcare professional at Nutramedica.org. To stay up to date with our latest programs, go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. We'll see you soon at Nutramedica.org.